This is a download from the BBC. For more information and our terms of use, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts. bbclearningenglish.com presents Talk About English, a series of radio features that support your English language studies. This week we hear the first in our series, Better Speaking, presented by Callum Robertson and featuring interviews with Richard Hallows.
This series, Better Speaking, is all about how you can become a fluent, confident speaker of English. In the programmes, we'll be hearing from learners of English from around the world, and also from someone who specialises in teaching speaking, trainer Richard Hallows.
Do you know, some students do have this confidence, and they're the students who really make the most progress and become, the good speakers of English. The students who really don't progress so quickly are students who, they worry about making mistakes so much, it stops them really communicating and making that progress.
And there'll be more from Richard Hallows later in the programme. But first, we hear from learners. What do you find most difficult about speaking English? We ask speakers from around the world.
My difficult is the grammar, because I didn't know to speak about past, present and future.
Now sometimes you want to say something, but it's hard to say in English. You got the words, but it's hard to change it to English words. So sometimes it's difficult to say everything what you want to say.
I don't like to speak English because I'm afraid that I will make mistake and people will laugh on me.
Yes, something I always found difficult was the pronunciation, because I was afraid of pronouncing a word wrongly. So there are words I know, but I don't know how to pronounce, and that has made me use less vocabulary.
Students from around the world talk about the difficulties of speaking English. They feel afraid. They worry about correct grammar and pronunciation. Sometimes they can't find the right word. If these are your worries too, then you're not alone. Here at the BBC, we often get letters and emails from learners asking for advice. This one came from Jinping in China.
I have learned English for almost 15 years. I have no problem with reading and listening, but speaking has always been a problem for me, because when I was at school, we always focused on grammar, vocabulary and exams. Now I really want to improve my spoken English to a new level, achieve that free speaking in the near future. Do you have any good suggestions on how to achieve this? I will try anything which can help me achieve this.
Jinping asks if we have any good suggestions to help her improve her spoken English. And over the next few weeks in Better Speaking, we'll be coming up with a few ideas. There'll be help and advice on becoming a more confident speaker, getting your meaning across and improving pronunciation. You can also learn words and expressions that will help you to sound more fluent.
bbclearningenglish.com.
Helping us on the journey towards better speaking is teacher and teacher trainer Richard Hallows. Hello, Richard.
Hi, Callum.
Tell us, what do you think makes a good speaker of English as an international language?
Well, I think there are lots of things, but most importantly, you've got to have a good range of vocabulary and grammar. You need to know lots of words. The more words you know, the better, obviously. And similarly with grammar, the more grammar you have, the better you can explain yourself.
And what other points?
Okay, thinking about words. Now, which words go with which words? For example, knife and
fork.
Yeah, these words go together. Hopefully this programme will help listeners speak more fluently, not more smoothly. We say speak fluently.
So English is often made up of expressions, words, groups of words that go together.
Exactly. We also need to think about pronunciation. Now, learners of English often worry about speaking like a native speaker. I think this is important, that they should realise this is not the way you need to speak. Most of the time our listeners are speaking to other non-native speakers of English, so they need to be intelligible to those people. It's not necessary to have a native accent.
So you just need to speak so you can be understood without difficulty, rather than sounding like a British gentleman or a British lady or something like that.
Exactly, yeah. And when we're speaking, sometimes maybe we need time to think about what we're saying. Rather than having a silence when you're speaking, you might like to say, In fact, I do this quite a lot when I'm speaking. And this helps you sound very natural and keeps the listener listening.
So it's not bad English?
Not bad English at all. It's very good English.
And very natural.
Making you feel more, perhaps, confident when you're speaking also.
So confidence is very important, and it's not necessary to be accurate all of the time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Richard, do you find that most of the students that you teach have this kind of confidence?
Do you know, some students do have this confidence, and they're the students who really make the most progress and become, the good speakers of English. The students who really don't progress so quickly are students who, they worry about making mistakes so much, it stops them really communicating and making that progress.
And what can you do to help those students who may lack that confidence?
It's very difficult because maybe these students have felt like this all their learning careers, if you like. I sometimes tell students to sometimes think about focusing on fluency when they're speaking. And maybe if they want to focus on accuracy, thinking about that for maybe 10 minutes or something. So you're in the pub in the evening and I think, okay, for the next 10 minutes, I'm going to really think about my grammar or really think about my vocabulary. And at the end of that 10 minutes, relax, have a good time and enjoy speaking.
Now that's good advice, but sometimes in a conversation it can be difficult to be fluent because you don't know what the word is for what you're trying to say. How can students deal with that?
Of course, this happens with all students, I think, unless you're very high level. I think the answer here is to not spend a very long time searching for that word. Don't sit there in silence. It's really boring for the person listening. You need to think of another word to express what you want to say. Or maybe the answer is a different grammar structure, but need to think around what you want to say and express yourself in a different way.
So different words which have the same meaning.
Yeah, and if it's not perfect, it doesn't matter. It's all about communicating.
So as long as people understand what it is you're trying to say, it doesn't really matter if you get exactly the right word or not if you can't find it.
Exactly, yeah.
And is there anything else that's a final piece of advice on this subject?
Well, I think really key is, you must enjoy speaking. It's not an exam. It's just about communicating. And if you enjoy it, you will be so much better.
So, Richard, to summarise those points, the first point?
The first point is think about speaking accurately some of the time, and then some of the time, let yourself go, relax, enjoy, communicate.
And the advice about vocabulary, if you can't think of the right word?
Don't spend a long time searching for that word and having big silences in the conversation. It's horrible. Rather, think of another word.
And the final piece of advice?
Enjoy speaking English. It's fun.
Richard Hallows, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And if you didn't quite catch all those tips, don't worry. Here's a chance to hear them again.
If you're worried about making mistakes when you speak English, then focus on accuracy, but only for a limited time, say 10 minutes. Then, after this fixed time, relax and just concentrate on being fluent and not worrying so much about making mistakes. If you're speaking in English and you don't know a word or phrase, don't stop and stay silent. If you can't think of the exact word, find another word or phrase which means the same thing. You need to think of ways of getting round the words and phrases you don't know by using simpler language that you do know. The key to increasing your confidence and therefore becoming a better speaker of English is to relax and enjoy yourself. Remember that speaking foreign languages should be fun. That was Talk About English from bbclearningenglish.com. bbclearningenglish.com presents Talk About English, a series of radio features that support your English language studies. This week we continue our series Better Speaking, presented by Callum Robertson and featuring interviews with Richard Hallows.
In today's programme, teacher Richard Hallows will be here with some more help and advice to make us better speakers.
I think you need to practice a little, and I think you need to practice often. Don't do lots and lots of pronunciation practice, but just be aware, just do a little bit now and again.
English is used as an international language in many different areas. Sport is one. When a football manager from Korea, Park Han-suk, had to speak to a worldwide audience about football supporters in his country, he did so in English. He explains that people in Korea like football very much, but they like to watch it at home on television. Koreans, he says, don't like to go and see a match live in a football stadium. They prefer to stay at home, have a picnic, or go with friends to have a drink.
In the hearts of the Korean people, they like football very much, more than baseball and basketball. But actually, they do not want to visit a stadium. Even if Korean people like football very much, sometimes they want to go another place, like picnic or do other things at home. Maybe Korean people like drinking so much. Maybe if a person is asked whether you go to the stadium or you join your friends in maybe a beer shop, something like that, I think maybe Korean people choose the going to the beer shop. I don't know.
Park Han-suk is someone who's overcome his fears of speaking English to the point where he can talk to an international audience in the language. But what's he doing that makes him such an effective user of the language? What's his secret to better speaking?
bbclearningenglish.com.
And with me again in the studio is teacher and teacher trainer Richard Hallows. Hello, Richard.
Hi, Callum.
And this week you've been listening to Korean football manager Park Han-suk. Here he is again.
In the hearts of the Korean people, they like football very much, more than baseball and basketball. But actually, they do not want to visit a stadium. Even if Korean people like football very much, sometimes they want to go another place, like picnic or do other things at home. Maybe Korean people like drinking so much. Maybe if a person is asked whether you go to the stadium or you join your friends in maybe a beer shop, something like that, I think maybe Korean people choose the going to the beer shop. I don't know.
That was Park Han-suk, a football manager from Korea there, talking about crowds. Now, Richard, how successful is this person as a speaker of English as an international language?
I think he's very successful because he's using the few words he knows in a very effective way. If I can draw your attention to the example of beer shop.
Maybe Korean people like drinking so much. Maybe if a person is asked whether you go to the stadium or you join your friends in maybe a beer shop, something like that.
He uses this word. It's not correct English, but we understand what he wants to say. The correct English is liquor store in America, and in Britain we would say off license. But beer shop is perfectly understandable. We know what he wants to say. So he's using his words in a very effective way, and I think this is a good piece of advice for our listeners.
So even if you don't know exactly the right word, you can still use other words to get your meaning across clearly.
Yeah, it's better to explain your way around the word. You use the words you have. For example, let me see if you can guess some words I'm telling you. Okay, I'm driving my car and suddenly I have you know when the air comes out of the tyre, there's a bang and the air comes...
Now, that's a puncture.
Okay, so I didn't need to use that word. You understood me perfectly well. Maybe, okay, what do you call the thing that, I want to clean my teeth?
Oh, it would be a toothbrush.
Okay, so there we are. It's very simple. It doesn't have to be a very complicated thing.
So not knowing the exact word in English is not really a big problem for communication.
No, absolutely.
So he deals with vocabulary very well, but if he were your student, what things would you like him to work on?
Okay, I think Park Han-suk is very understandable, but I think we could improve his pronunciation a little bit. I'm thinking particularly of the sentence stress that he uses. So by sentence stress, I'm talking about when you make a sentence, where does the stress go in the sentence?
So the strong part of the word.
Exactly. It's very even with Park Han-suk. Every word is stressed the same. This can be a problem because it can sometimes affect the meaning of what you want to say. If I give you a sentence, see if you can work out what the important part of the information is. What am I trying to tell you? For example, if I tell you, Callum, I've got this big black cat.
Well, it's not a small cat, it's a big cat, because you stressed big.
Yeah. Now, I could say, I've got a big black cat.
So the colour, this time you've stressed the colour,
Yeah.
so it's not a white cat,
It's not a brown cat, it's
a black cat.
exactly. Or I could even say, I've got a big black cat.
So you've got a cat and not a dog. So it's the same words, but by putting the stress on a different place, you change the meaning, really.
Yeah. Now, you've got to be aware of different stress patterns in your language, and by knowing the differences, this is going to help you, to work out what you need to focus on, where the differences lie, and what you need to do to make yourself more understandable.
And it's not only just in sentences that stress is important as well, it's also in individual words.
Yeah, again, Park Han-suk says they like football.
In the hearts of the Korean people, they like football very much.
He puts the stress on ball. It should be on football. And so, again, this makes not just the word difficult to understand, but the whole phrase becomes quite difficult.
So I suppose the problem is then that if you use the stress pattern from your own language into English, it might not be the same, and it might cause some problems for understanding, possibly.
Yeah, so again, in Korean, the stress pattern here is very even. And so you need to be aware of that and to see the differences. A different language might have a stress pattern where, for example, the ends of words are stressed much more than English. So you need to see how you need to change that.
And have you got any advice or tips for students to help them with this?
Okay, when you learn a new word, don't just think about learning the word. There's so much more information you need to add to that. An important thing is checking the stress. A good dictionary will always tell you the stress. So when you learn that word, learn the stress. Mark it in your notebooks. Underline the syllable or mark it on top or something, but mark the stress. When you learn a word, it's a good idea to say it out loud with very exaggerated, with very strong stress. So, for example, if I was learning the word, television, I might say it, television. So I really exaggerate it so that I can remember it. It's all about remembering. I think you need to practice a little, and I think you need to practice often. Don't do lots and lots of pronunciation practice, but just be aware, just do a little bit now and again. And maybe if you can, try recording your speaking or have another person listen to you and get some advice from them.
That's a very good tip there. Richard Hallows, thank you very much.
bbclearningenglish.com.
Richard talked there about what to do if you want to say something but you don't know the word or phrase in English, or you've simply forgotten it. He said that you need to talk your way around the unknown word by using words that you do know, just like Park Han-suk did with his use of the expression beer shop. This is something that Rafael from Spain has also discovered, as he's learned to become a more fluent speaker of English.
As a non-native speaker, your vocabulary sometimes is not as good as you like to be. So, the many terms that you don't know when you want to express something and you don't know the right word for it, you tend to just go around and trying to explain it using different sentences and trying to define how that thing is used for, in which way it's used. And another thing we do, at least as Spanish, we use our hands a lot as well, and the face and everything. I mean, suddenly the whole body language becomes an integral part of the explanation, and all of that just to say a simple word.
Better speaking means better communication. And if it means using body language as well as your voice, then that's as much a part of English as it is in any language. And now just time to hear today's better speaking tips again.
When you hear native speakers speaking English, notice how certain important words are stressed in a sentence. Think about how English sentence stress is different from the sentence stress in your own language. When you meet a new word and you write it down in your vocabulary book, don't forget to mark the stress. Which syllable is stressed in the word? If you're not sure, look in a Good Learner's English dictionary. The stress will be shown in there. You can practice word stress by saying the word and repeating it, giving the stressed syllable exaggerated emphasis. For example, vocabulary. Vocabulary. If you're speaking English and you can't think of the right word, don't stop or stumble. Explain your way around the word you don't know by using words that you do know.
That was Talk About English from bbclearningenglish.com. bbclearningenglish.com presents Talk About English, a series of radio features that support your English language studies. This week we continue our series Better Speaking, presented by Callum Robertson and featuring interviews with Richard Hallows.
Try to imagine what globalization can possibly mean to half of humanity that has never made or received a phone call. The simple fact of the matter is this: if we cannot make globalization work for all, in the end it will work for none.
Kofi Annan using English to talk about globalization. In the programme today, Richard Hallows is with me again to look at Kofi Annan's use of English and give us some more advice on becoming better speakers.
He's interacting with us. Try to imagine. He's asking us to do something.
If you find it difficult to speak English fluently and would like some help to become more confident and maybe one day use English as effectively as Kofi Annan, then this series, Better Speaking, is for you. Kofi Annan is from Ghana in West Africa, and as we've just heard, he uses English as an international language in a highly effective way. In this excerpt from a speech on globalization, he's asking his listeners to make sure that the process of economic globalization helps everybody in the world, the poor as well as the rich.
It is a much tougher sell out there in a world where half of our fellow human beings struggle to survive on less than $2 a day. Try to imagine what globalization can possibly mean to half of humanity that has never made or received a phone call. The simple fact of the matter is this: if we cannot make globalization work for all, in the end it will work for none.
Even though he's making a speech, which is a style of English that is quite formal and has been carefully prepared, he's still using his spoken language skills to communicate with his audience. But what can we learn from him? What's his secret to better speaking?
bbclearningenglish.com.
And with me again in the studio is teacher and teacher trainer Richard Hallows. Hello, Richard.
Hello, Callum.
And you've been listening this week to Kofi Annan. Let's hear him again.
It is a much tougher sell out there in a world where half of our fellow human beings struggle to survive on less than $2 a day. Try to imagine what globalization can possibly mean to half of humanity that has never made or received a phone call. The simple fact of the matter is this: if we cannot make globalization work for all, In the end, it will work for none.
So, Richard, how successful do you think Kofi Annan is as a speaker of English as an international language?
Of course, he's really successful, isn't he? I think what's interesting here is the way that he's making a speech. It's very, very interesting, the language he uses. He uses language to make us want to listen. Sometimes he uses alternative words. So maybe sometimes he refers to people as human beings, and then another time, rather than repeat that word, he says humanity.
In a world where half of our fellow human beings struggle to survive on less than $2 a day, try to imagine what globalization can possibly mean to half of humanity that has never made or received a phone call.
So he's putting variety into his vocabulary.
He's also he's interacting with us. He's asking us to do something. So when he's speaking, he says, "Try to imagine." Da, 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 da. So we're all like, we start thinking, and oh yes, it's something for us to do.
Try to imagine what globalization can possibly mean to half of humanity that has never made or received a phone call.
So the listener is being involved in the speech in this case.
Exactly. He makes his speech stronger. There's one example. He could say, the fact is, but he doesn't. He says, the simple fact of the matter is. So he's making it stronger.
The simple fact of the matter is this.
Which is, again, a nice way of, making people listen. And it's generally quite a dramatic kind of way of speaking, contrasting words like all with none and things like that. It's very interesting.
If we cannot make globalization work for all, in the end, it will work for none.
This was probably a scripted speech by Kofi Annan.
Sure. I mean, obviously you can't script a conversation, but you can predict things that you often talk about with one particular person. Now, I went to Spain for the weekend the other day. I saw my Spanish friend Jon, and I always talk to him about football. He's a big football fan. Now, I needed to think of the type of vocabulary I needed. I mean, I know these words, but I need to review them in my head. What kind of words do you need to talk about football? What do you think, Callum?
Well, I mean...
In English. You tell me in English.
Yes, I mean, there'll be footballing words, for example, things like goal, draw, shoot,
result,
kick.
Yeah, I was, reviewing these words in my head, so I'm preparing. So when I talk to him, it's much better, it's much easier, and I speak much more fluently, and I communicate more effectively.
So certain subjects will have, certain vocabulary that is likely to be part of that conversation, that part of topic, and if you prepare yourself, think about those words, then, it's going to help you in your conversation.
Yeah, exactly.
Kofi Annan is obviously a very, very competent speaker and communicator in English, but if we really wanted to be picky, is there anything that we could say to improve his English?
Okay, there's maybe a small pronunciation point we could look at. He says, at one point he says, less than $2 a day, but instead of less, he says les.
In a world where half of our fellow human beings struggle to survive on less than $2 a day.
And there's another sentence he says, has never made or received a phone call, but he doesn't say has, he says has.
Half of humanity that has never made or received a phone call.
So there's a confusion here of sounds z and s at the end of words.
But is that really a big problem here?
Well, I mean, no. Usually the context makes it very clear anyway. I mean, there could be a confusion between peace and peas, but I think the context is clear, isn't it?
Yeah.
There are lots of other words where one sound can change the meaning, and the s and z example, for example, rice and rise, or loose and lose, or advice and advise.
So in some circumstances, that difference between that s and that z sound can make a completely new word, which can alter the meaning.
And there are times when we use this z sound quite a lot in English. When we're talking about possession, we use the apostrophe s, which is a z sound, like John's car, for example, not John's car,
and Richard's advice.
Exactly. You can also extend this idea to think about how one sound, within a word, not necessarily at the end, can change the word from one meaning to another meaning to another meaning. It happens a lot in English. bit, bat, but. You know, it's just one small change. Or see and she, or boat and vote. This can cause problems of communication. So, you know, it's quite important to recognise the problems or the differences between your language and English.
So, Richard, on these points of pronunciation, do you have any advice that you could pass on to our listeners?
Yeah, one important piece of advice is that you need to be able to recognise a sound before you can actually produce it. If you can't hear it, then you can't make it. Now, to illustrate this point, I've brought along one of my students. This is Benjamin.
Hello, Benjamin.
Hello.
What we will do is Benjamin will listen to me saying some words. The words have two different sounds, either sh or ch. So Benjamin will listen to the words and he will tell me, number one, if it's sh, and number two, if it's ch. You might want to try this yourself at home. Okay? Are you ready, Benjamin?
Yes.
Okay. The first one, ship.
Number one.
Good. Chip.
2.
Cherry.
2.
Sherry.
Number 1.
Shoes.
Number 1.
Choose.
2.
Washing.
1.
Watching.
2.
Watching.
2.
Ooh, nearly got you there. Very good. Okay, so we can do these kind of exercises, and he can now start to, you know, hear the difference, and he knows that he needs to hear the difference. Now we can move on from this, and he can practice saying the words to me. So now here's Benjamin. He will read the words, and I will say one or two. So we'll see if he can now produce the words. Okay, Benjamin.
Ship.
1.
Watching.
2.
Shoes.
1.
Match.
2.
Show.
1. Very good. So you can see how you move from recognition, first of all, you know, hearing the sound, and then producing the sound. Now, there are other things you need to think about, like the position of your tongue, the position of your lips, seeing how you make the sound physically with your mouth.
Those things are quite difficult to tell. How can you help?
One thing you can do with the lips is to use a mirror. It sounds a bit silly, but if you hold a mirror and you look at yourself making the sounds, you can see the shape of your lips. Now, again, you can get books which show you the correct position and the correct position of your tongue. If you can't get that, it's better to, you know, work with another person and see if you can correct each other.
So for those pieces of advice, Richard, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And Benjamin, thank you very much for coming in.
Bye.
Before we go today, if you didn't quite catch all those tips that Richard gave us, don't worry. Here's a chance to hear them again.
If you're speaking to a group of people and you want to hold their attention, try to add variety to the language you use and learn some useful phrases for interacting with your listeners and holding their attention. If you know that you'll be talking about a particular subject or topic, then prepare in advance some of the words and phrases that you might need. If there are particular English sounds that you find difficult to say, listen out for these sounds when you're listening to good speakers of English. After you can recognise these difficult sounds, then you'll be able to make these sounds yourself. Use a mirror to watch your lips and help you make the right sounds. Or work with a partner and correct each other.
That was Talk About English from bbclearningenglish.com.
If you find it difficult to speak English and would like some help to become more fluent, then Better Speaking is for you.
Well, obviously I've survived in business by being able to speak English and Greek, which is not very useful outside Greece. So definitely English must be the business language.
Businessman Stelios Hadjiouanou has become well known here in Britain as the founder of a highly successful independent airline. In this interview, He explains why he chose to start his business in Britain and not in his home country, Greece.
Well, obviously I've survived in business by being able to speak English and Greek, which is not very useful outside Greece. So definitely English must be the business language. I think it would have been impossible to run an airline in the UK without speaking English. That would have been serious limitation to your ability to communicate with customers. And in fact, when people ask me, you come from Greece, why didn't you start the airline in Greece, or why did you go to France or Germany or everything else? And one of the things I say is that Greece is too small, is in the wrong end of Europe. And out of the big markets, the German, the French and the English, the only language I could speak was English, so I had to come to London.
Stelios needs English to run his business and, as we heard there, he speaks the language very well. But what's he doing that makes him such a good communicator in English? What's his secret to better speaking?
bbclearningenglish.com.
And with me again in the studio is teacher and teacher trainer Richard Hallows. Hello, Richard.
Hello, Callum.
And before we hear more from Richard, let's listen again to Stelios.
Well, obviously I've survived in business by being able to speak English and Greek, which is not very useful outside Greece. So definitely English must be the business language. I think it would have been impossible to run an airline in the UK without speaking English. That would have been serious limitation to your ability to communicate with customers. And in fact, when people ask me, you come from Greece, why didn't you start the airline in Greece, or why did you go to France or Germany or everything else? And one of the things I say is that Greece is too small, is in the wrong end of Europe. And out of the big markets, the German, the French and the English, the only language I could speak was English, so I had to come to London.
So, Stelios Hadjioannou there, obviously a very successful businessman, but Richard, how successful do you think he is as a speaker of international English?
I think he's very successful, and I think one thing, what I find particularly interesting about Stelios is the way that he organises his speaking.
And what do you mean by that?
Well, he makes it very easy for us to follow what he wants to say. He uses words like and but very well, but more than that, listen to the way he asks a question to himself and then goes on to answer that question.
And in fact, when people ask me, you come from Greece, why didn't you start the airline in Greece, or why did you go to France or Germany or everything else? And one of the things I say is that Greece is too small, is in the wrong end of Europe. And out of the big markets, the German, the French and the English, the only language I could speak was English, so I had to come to London.
Now, by asking the question, it prepares us being the listener, to listen for the answer. So why did he come to the UK? Well, I wonder. And, we start thinking, oh, maybe it's this or maybe it's that. And then he gives us the answer. So it's a good way to get the listener to follow easily what you want to them to hear.
So helping the listener out in the conversation.
Yeah, and I think what our listeners can do is they can actually steal this question or adapt it in different ways.
For example?
Well, they could say, an interesting question is, and then go on to say that, or I think, let me tell you about, is a good expression.
So that there are ways of drawing the listener into the conversation, getting them involved and making them want to listen more.
Yeah, it's a way of marking that there's some important information coming next. It's a useful idea to make it clear as possible what type of information is coming next. So I think if you're adding extra information or maybe contrasting information, saying something opposite in meaning, our listeners know, I think, to say and but maybe we can make that even clearer.
How?
Well, instead of just saying and, maybe and another thing is, or and on top of that. Or maybe even just stressing and. So, for example, Stelios speaks very fluently and organises it very well. So we can stress the and to make it very clear that there's some extra information coming.
And that's very natural.
That's very natural indeed. Native speakers do it all the time. If you're contrasting information, instead of saying just but, maybe but in fact, or but on the other hand, and so we know it's very clear there's some contrasting information coming, and listen for that information.
little phrases like "and another thing is" and "on top of that" are unnatural markers to put into sentences. Can you give us some examples of these?
Okay, so learning English is about having enough language, and on top of that, making our speaking clear through good organisation.
Right, so there's two things going on there, and on top of that indicates that there's something more as well that needs to be listened out for.
An example of contrasting information might be that I came here by bus today and I left my house very early. I thought it would take a long time, but in fact, it took me 20 minutes.
So, in fact, used there to contrast information. That's a very natural kind of language. Stelios, as we said, is a very natural speaker of English. Let's listen to one more clip from him, and he's got his own piece of advice for learners and speakers of English. Let's listen again.
What I find fascinating is sometimes when you're having perhaps even a casual meeting, even a dinner, with a group of people from different countries, where the only common link really is business, and you try and talk outside the business, and then there's very little common ground. So one of the things I've learned is that if you're going to communicate with people whose mother tongue is not English, don't try and use too many colloquial expressions, don't try and crack too many jokes, because it may go over their head completely and you may lose them.
So what do you think of that piece of advice there, Richard? I know that many students, they like to learn idioms and colloquial expressions from British English or American English, but there's a little warning there from Stelios, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. Students do like learning idioms, and I think it can be fun, but I think you can spend a lot of time learning these idioms, and if you're speaking with non-native speakers, maybe it's not the best way to spend your time. Maybe they're not really going to be understood.
So, if you're speaking to native speakers, then that's quite a natural thing. But other non-native speakers of English might not exactly understand what you mean when you use these idioms and jokes.
Better to keep it simple, really simple and clear.
So, if we go back now to thinking about helping people who may be wanting to improve their English, what piece of advice can you give them today?
Well, first of all, be aware that you need to organise your speaking, which hopefully people are now. And I think listen for ways in which people organise their speaking. So next time you're listening, don't just listen to the content, but listen how it's put together. Okay? If you can read an interview, or maybe if you've got a course book, look at the transcript of the listening in the back of the book and pick out ways in which the speaking is organised. Okay? Look at the way people add information, the way they contrast information, the way they introduce new ideas or maybe interrupt other people, and so on. The way it's organised very generally.
So there's more than just and but.
Exactly, yes.
And what about that last piece of advice about using colloquial expressions, idioms and jokes and so on?
Yeah, I think using colloquial expressions, idioms can be very nice if you're speaking with a native speaker. If you're speaking with non-natives, maybe these things will not be understood, will make you not very clear. So when you're learning English, maybe concentrate your time more on learning other things and focus on speaking as clearly and as simply as possible.
For today, Richard Hallows, thank you very much.
Thank you, Callum.
And now, just time to hear today's Better Speaking Tips again.
Listen out for ways that people organise what they're going to say. Listen to how good speakers of English add information. For example, they might say, "and another thing is," or perhaps they might say, "and on top of that," or they might just stress the word "and."
Stelios speaks very fluently and organises it very well, so we can stress the "and" to make it very clear that there's some extra information coming.
Listen to how speakers of English contrast information. For example, by saying, "but in fact," or by saying, "on the other hand."
I came here by bus today and I left my house very early. I thought it would take a long time, but in fact, it took me 20 minutes.
Notice the way fluent speakers introduce new ideas or new information. For example, they might say, "An interesting question is," or "let me tell you about." Remember the way that Stelios asked a question, and then went on to answer it himself.
And in fact, when people ask me, you come from Greece, why didn't you start the airline in Greece, or why did you go to France or Germany or everything else? And one of the things I say is that, Greece is too small, isn't it?
If you're studying English at school or college and you have a course book, there may be transcripts of listening material in the book. If there are, read them and highlight the phrases that speakers use to add information, contrast information, introduce new ideas, and so on.
Look at the transcript of the listening in the back of the book and pick out ways in which the speaking is organised.
That was Talk About English from bbclearningenglish.com.